coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP. We've got another round of WannaCry analysis, the latest on the FCC's battle over net neutrality, and a 2017 check-in, IPv6 Tunnels, and you. Plus, some fantastic feedback, a robust roundup, and so much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems, network, and administration podcast. This episode was streamed in front of a live IRC audience and is brought to you by our three excellent sponsors, Digitalocean, Ting, and IX Systems. My name is Wes, and joining me this week is Dan, the backup master, the explainer, and the oh-so-busy organizer, our friend Dan. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Good evening, everybody.
Nice
Hello,
to see you again. What a fine orange shirt you've got on today. You look so chipper.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I don't know where I got this shirt from. I'm good. I'm looking forward to tonight when I'm headed out to the pub to meet some friends and we're playing Quizza.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yes.
I suppose that means we should dive right into our awesome TechSNAP show today and get started. What do you have lined up first for us?
Well, tonight we're going to read from a blog that I've known about for a while, and I have to be upfront about this. This is, I work with these guys. I know all the authors. I work for them on a daily basis, and this is actually my employer. So that said, we're going to talk about some interesting details about the WannaCry virus that I did not know about until I read this blog. It goes into some detail about how it works and some of the rather clever things that it does and gives you a little bit of information about how you may better protect yourself. So, this is a Talus blog. Player 3 has entered the game. Now, we're going to go through the executive summary rather quickly. Basically, the malware has a capability to scan heavily over TCP port 445, which is Samba, spreading similar to a worm, compromising hosts, encrypting files stored on them, and then demanding a ransom payment in the form of Bitcoin. It is important to note that this is not a threat that simply scans internal ranges to identify where to spread. It is also capable of spreading based on vulnerabilities it finds in other hosts and other externally facing hosts across the internet. Additionally, we have observed WannaCry samples making use of double pulsar, which is a persistent backdoor that is generally used to access and execute code on previously compromised systems. So not only is it looking for new systems to take over, it's looking for systems which have already been compromised. So the malware uses Eternal Blue for the initial exploitation of the Samba vulnerability. If successful, it will then implant the double pulsar backdoor and utilize it to install the malware. But if the exploit fails and the double pulsar backdoor has already installed the malware, it will still leverage this to install the ransomware. This is the cause of the worm-like activity that has been widely observed across the internet. So organizations should ensure that devices running Windows are fully patched and deployed in accordance with best practices. Additionally, organizations should have Samba ports 139 and 445 blocked from all externally accessible hosts. Now, the Canadian government is actually doing a scan. It has a program to do a scan for externally accessible Samba ports. And Alan Jude brought this to my attention yesterday or today, I can't remember. But he was telling me that he got an email because he has a publicly accessible Samba port, but it's not. They use it for setting up hosts, but there are state organizations helping out here and letting people know that, hey, listen, you may want to look at this. They're not saying you have to change it. They're just letting you know that it's accessible, which is nice. Now, what I hadn't seen somewhere else is the kill switch domain. Now, if you scroll down to under the first graph, you can see the little green graph. They noticed an uptick in the scanning of our internet-facing honeypot starting shortly before 5 a.m., which is about 9 UTC. So that's the graph of the queries coming in. So then they first observed requests for the kill switch domains starting at about 7:24 UTC. And there's the name of the domain. It starts with IUQEF.
Oh, yeah, rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah, it does. Now, I remember seeing domains like this when I worked for a registrar, and these are typically used by bad actors. You know, random stuff like this that no one would accidentally register. And the interesting note here is the domain composition looks almost human-typed, with most characters falling into the top and home rows of a keyboard. So someone's just sitting here and randomly hitting keys to generate this.
Yeah, it does actually. I didn't notice that at first, but you're right. It does really, like, I could just like type jam on the keyboard for a while, and that's exactly what would come out.
Yep. So communication to this domain might be categorized as a kill switch due to its role in the overall execution of the malware. So it attempts to do an HTTP GET to this domain, and if it fails, it just carries on with the infection. However, if it succeeds, the subroutine exits. And they note that the domain is registered to a well-known sinkhole, effectively causing this sample to terminate its malicious activity. Now, what's a sinkhole? They refer to a DNS sinkhole, which is also known as a sinkhole server, and is basically an internet sinkhole, an internet sinkhole or a black hole DNS is a DNS server that gives out false information to prevent the use of a domain name. So in this case, all they did was register it, and if you try and go to it or make use of it, nothing happens. But you could do a fetch on it at that time. Now, then they mentioned that this this domain was registered on the 12th of May, which corresponds to other claims made about this domain when it was registered by the researcher in question. Now, this is the stuff that I found the most interesting, and this was the analysis of the malware and what it's doing. Basically, they start off with two threads. The first thread checks the IP address of the infected machine and attempts to connect to TCP port 445, which is Samba, of each host or IP address in the same subnet. The second thread generates random IP addresses on the internet to perform the same action. So here's a thread, and all it's doing is trying to scan everything locally, and then it's going out on the internet to find things out there. When the malware successfully connects to another machine, a connection is initiated and data is transferred. So it starts sending the stuff out right away. Now, there's another executable in here which checks for disk drives, including network shares and removable storage devices, mapped to a letter, such as C, D, E, etc. The malware then checks for files with a file extension as listed in the appendix and encrypts these files using 248-bit RSA encryption. You ain't getting into that easily. So while the files are being encrypted, the malware creates a new directory called Tor, into which it drops tor.exe and 9 DLL files used by Tor. So why does it want Tor? Basically, the Tor file is executed by this other process, which initiates network traffic connections to Tor nodes, and this allows WannaCry to attempt to preserve anonymity by proxying their traffic through the Tor network. So basically now what they're doing is they're phoning home, and they're phoning home through the Tor network.
Right. Interesting.
So it tries various methods to aid its execution by leveraging both @trib.exe to modify the +H flag hide and also icalcs.exe to allow full access rights for all users. So basically it grants everything for everyone. Everything on everything for everyone. And they want to do that because they want to start encrypting stuff. And what's interesting is that the malware has been designed as a modular service. So it looks like the executable files associated with the ransomware were written by a totally different individual who developed the service module. So this means that the structure of this malware is such that it can deliver and run different malicious payloads. So you develop a new malicious payload and plug it in, and you've already got the service side of it ready, and it's just plug and play. So scroll down now and show this WannaCrypter Decryptor 2.0 screenshot.
Oh, look at that. That's so red. I'm a little scared right now.
Now, what's interesting about this is this contains no images. It's not an HTTP file or a text file. After encryption is complete, the malware displays this ransomware note. And this ransom screen is actually an executable. So there's no text or graphics that you can search for or block based on. It's just an executable.
Oh, interesting. So they've like embedded everything within it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, this next thing that I'm going to read is very important. These sorts of ransomware things can only occur if people pay up. If nobody paid up, if there was no money in this, they wouldn't be carried out. They would dry up. But people are paying out because they have no choice. So basically, you should be aware that I'm quoting here now, organizations should be aware that there is no obligation for criminals to supply decryption keys following the payment of a ransom. Talos strongly urges anyone who's been compromised to avoid paying the ransom if possible, as paying the ransom directly funds development of these malicious campaigns. So you pay up, the campaign continues. Now, going into the final section that we're going to read over is mitigation and prevention. So basically, if you want to avoid falling into this trap, keep your stuff fully patched. At a minimum, ensure Microsoft Bulletin MS17-010 has been applied. And basically, do the right thing. If you have an SMB publicly accessible by the internet's port 139 and 445, you should immediately block inbound traffic because that's how you're going to get infected. Basically, you should also consider blocking connections to Tor nodes and Tor traffic on the network. Known Tor exit nodes are listed within the security intelligence feed of Firepower devices. This is one of Cisco's devices. You can also get that information somewhere else. So enabling this list to be blacklisted will prevent outbound communications to Tor networks.
That seems reasonable if you're not, if you're on a secured network where you are not using those services at all.
Yep. So maybe what we should do is, can you think of any valid reasons for companies to have a Tor in use?
That's a good question. Maybe like journalistic organizations or some sort of like nonprofits or other things might need it. But like an average tech organization, your public companies, etc. Like maybe not. Like I definitely think it's important, and I don't want to advocate for like too much lockdown where it might inhibit something that we would want later. But you're right. Like this could be an easy way to kind of shut off some of this stuff.
Yeah, most people don't need it. Mm-hmm. You can, if you need it, you can manage it on a case-by-case basis.
Right, and there's always if you have a legitimate use case, then you can always submit a ticket and go through the process and blah blah blah. Interesting. Well, this is quite the breakdown.
These guys are good. I like these guys.
Definitely. Anything else you want to add for this story?
No, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, well, with that, let's jump right to our first sponsor today. That's our friends over at Digitalocean.com. Head on over to Digitalocean.com. There, you will find cloud computing designed for developers. What does that mean? Well, I think it means that they're trying to make things easy. They're trying to make things simple. They're trying to make things quick. They want to enable you to make awesome new products, services, startups, games, websites, vlogs, podcasts, whatever it is that you're trying to create, DigitalOcean can be the partner for you. So going over to DigitalOcean.com, use our promo code. Yeah, that's right. Promo code, one word, SNAPOcean. Yeah, SNAPOcean. Say it with me now. That will get you a $10 credit. What does that $10 credit get you? Well, go make an account. Got to make an account first, then apply the promo code, then head right over to that pricing page. There you will find simple, no-nonsense pricing, monthly plans. Maybe you want hourly plans. Whatever you want, DigitalOcean is there for you. Prices start at just $5 a month. For that, you get 512 MB of memory, 1 core processor, 20 gigs of pure SSD disk. Yeah, it's all SSDs over DigitalOcean. They were some of the first to jump on the SSD bandwagon. Their droplets are snappy, fast. They start in less than 55 seconds. And you get a whole terabyte of premium transfer. Plus, with that $10 credit, that's like 2 months. So if you're anything like me, you're going to try this for like 2 months and be like, wow, for $5 a month, I can't not do this. It's too good of a deal. It's so nice. They have a ton of Linux distributions that you want to use. Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, Container Linux, FreeBSD, pretty much whatever you want. And because they use real KVM virtualization underneath, you can follow some, if you're a more advanced user, you can follow some guides. You can start running Arch. You can run OpenBSD, NetBSD. Really, the sky is the limit. Plus, DigitalOcean has really been stepping their game up. They compete like none other with a lot of these like bigger cloud companies that you might have heard about, you might be using. You might think, oh, I really need this, such and such brand to get this feature. No, go check out DigitalOcean. It's really worth reassessing, even if you've looked at them before, because in the past couple of months, they have added a ton of new features. Features like load balancing, monitoring, and right now they're just working on adding high CPU droplets. So if you really have those important workloads, DigitalOcean is now a great option. Plus, they have all the features that you've come to expect, right? Like private networking between droplets in the same data center. They've got snapshots. They've got attachable storage. Yeah, that's SSD. And they've got all the wonderful things that you've come to expect, plus their community page, right? So DigitalOcean is a great place to go check out really any kind of guide or networking situation, whatever you need. Go to the community page. If you search it on Google, probably one of the first things you'll find is a link to DigitalOcean, because they pay real editors to take community submissions, turn them into great documentations. That just shows like DigitalOcean understands the projects you want to run, the software you're trying to create, and they want to be your awesome partner. So go get started in less than 55 seconds. DigitalOcean.com. Our promo code, SNAPOcean. That lets DigitalOcean know that you appreciate them sponsoring our program, and then you can let us know all the cool things you create with DigitalOcean. Okay, that brings us to our next topic today, which is involves the FCC. We've covered them before. They have some filings. I'm not prepared to be excited about this. Really has been kind of depressing. But Dan, maybe that shouldn't be the case. Tell us more.
Well, it's been well known that the FCC want to change their rules on net neutrality. And some people have been arguing that basically nothing has changed because the rules that were going to come in never actually came in, and now we're just back to where we were. But John Oliver runs a TV show.
You may have heard of it.
You may have heard of it. And he's a bit concerned that what's about to happen is basically not good for the rest of us. And I agree with him. It's not good for the rest of us. Net neutrality is a very important issue for everyone, whether you're using the internet heavily or not. So basically he said, hey, listen, here's a way that you can let the FCC know what you think about it. And I believe that shortly thereafter, the FCC was claiming that they were being DDoSed. Other people claim that, well, that's what happened when you wind up having a whole lot of submissions. But they're claiming DDoS. People are just claiming, no, basically your servers get overwhelmed with the amount of incoming information. So this analysis says that the public comments on the FCC's anti-net neutrality proceeding have exploded over the past week following an incisive pro-net neutrality rant from John Oliver on Sunday. The proceeding, which had accumulated about 40,000 public comments as of Friday, May 7th at 8 p.m., just prior to Oliver's segment, has now seen more than 1.1 million comments as of 5 days later. Now, to put that in perspective, in 5 days, they got 28 times more submissions than what they had before. And what's interesting about these submissions is it appears that a lot of the names and addresses for some of the pro changes, like the people that are not in favor of net neutrality going away, it looks like some of the addresses used for this came from a breach.
Interesting.
They had also contacted a few people who said, no, I never submitted that. So it looks like someone went and downloaded this publicly available breach data and used it to submit claims that didn't actually have real people behind it. Now, it's kind of difficult to wade through this and figure out how much of this was real and how much of this wasn't real. But this one particular person's analysis of it is that overwhelmingly the submissions support net neutrality. In fact, only 2% opposed it, and only 1.5% were neither support nor oppose. So 96% of the non-spam filings on net neutrality favored supporting net neutrality. Now, you got to be very careful here to draw when he's talking about this spam. If you go back up to the top of the page, he uses the term spam to indicate an identical bit of text that was repeatedly filed many times. Importantly, we don't know exactly what share of these spam messages are legitimate, although we do know that some are fabricated. There is some evidence of botting or spamming on the pro and pro net neutrality side as well, although not likely to the same degree. And it's not addressed in this post, and it could shift the conclusions. And he welcomes other people to address these caveats, and he's happy to share or collaborate with any of the data. Now, if you look at the anti-net neutrality stuff, it all came in between May 11th and May 12th in a huge burst of messages. So there was about 40,000, I'm looking here, between 30 and 40,000 submissions per hour.
That's crazy.
From about midday on the 11th up to May 12th.
Wow.
Now, compared to all the pro stuff that came in mostly late May 8th after the show, and then it died down in the morning, and then it came up again as people woke up, and then it died down late in the day again. And then again on May 11th, there is a peak, and then throughout May 11th and 12th, it sort of was almost even. And there's a little bit more on the 12th. So it's sort of, whenever you look at a network traffic graph, say for a website, you always see these peaks during the day. You know, the East Coast wakes up and it peaks up, and the West Coast wakes up and it keeps going up. And then as the West Coast starts to go to sleep, it dies down again. Now this is, of course that's for US centric sites, but I've seen these sort of peaks and valleys all the time in my own data. So
yeah, absolutely. Like the natural
familiar.
Rhythms of human behavior.
Whereas the anti-net neutrality spam there's a few peaks. There's nothing rolling like this, and then bang, midday Tuesday, it jumps straight up to 35,000. How did 35,000 people suddenly happen like that? That didn't happen with the pro stuff from Oliver's. So there's more and more evidence pointing to the fact that most of this pro stuff was done by bots.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I like this type of analysis. It's interesting to see how you can kind of break it down, try to infer a little bit about people's behavior, the source of some of these filings, especially with like a reasonably public data set like this.
Yes, and if you go to the website, what was it? Go FCC yourself, FCCyourself.com.
Oh, there we go.
So, because of a procedural quirk, the FCC will not be considering any comments on the issue of net neutrality that are submitted over the next week or so. So, what quirk is that, I wonder? What
I wonder as well.
On that?
Let's take a peek here.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes. May 11th.
Guidance on the FCC's sunshine period and the Restoring Internet Freedom proceeding. Oh, that's quite a name.
Yeah. I have no idea why they're getting all concerned about this. Of course, that's because they're trying to figure out what happened with the DDoS. It wasn't DDoS, not based on anything I see.
No, it seems to be organic.
Yeah. Because people may not understand what the term organic means. What it means basically is when you ask people to go and respond to something, you don't get 70 million people all go in and do it all at once. It gradually peaks as more and more people, they watch the show, they say, yeah, I'll do that, but they don't all do it at once. It builds to a peak and then it gradually goes down again. Organic stuff likes little bell curves like that. So
right, you could, in some ways you can model it as like a bunch of people who are, there's some coordination, but mostly they're doing their own behavior. When they happen to watch the show is different. It's not, it's not directly coordinated.
Some of them may have been watching on a delay. They get home, they start watching it on video.
Some people have patience. It can save the new episode for a day later somehow.
So the conclusion of the gentleman who did this analysis is the FCC should reconsider its position on net neutrality. That's his statement. Now, the FCC has now entered a sunshine period for docket 17-108, during which it will not consider new comments. Given the magnitude of filings, 695,000, if you exclude the spam, and the balance of opinion expressed, 97% in favor of net, this analysis suggests that the FCC should reconsider its position on net neutrality during this period of reflection.
Wow.
So the guy is trying to make all his information public. And the top comment here is, if this is passed against the will of an overwhelming majority of the public, we can say definitively that we do not live in a functional democracy. And then someone else says, oh, of course it'll pass.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, boy. Well, this is like a fascinating analysis. I'm really glad to see that. I'm prepared to be disappointed with what happens next. I'm sure we'll cover it right here on the TechSNAP program. In terms of, the FCC's rulings and decisions and as the process moves on. But it is really nice to see, to see people engaged in this. And like I said, I don't know how it's going to go, but at least people should at least be aware of what's happening, their rights, how it impacts their ability for free speech, content acquisition, and how does it really affect their day-to-day lives and the values that they care about? Because it's really presented often as, like a dry academic subject in some ways. So I think like the work John Oliver's done, this article, maybe us covering it, it can bring it a little bit closer to people's day-to-day lives.
Consider that if net neutrality was not in existence, Google could never have happened.
Yeah, right.
Who are the big players then? Alta Vista, Yahoo. They were huge. Google could never have gotten started if net neutrality was not observed.
Yeah, that's
because they would have just been shut. They would have been shut out. They couldn't have got there. People would have said, "Oh no, I want my Yahoo. I want this." So anyway, contact your representatives. let them know that you're in support of net neutrality rules, and don't be messing around with what's already working.
Yes, exactly. Turns out the internet wasn't broken, so don't try to break it now. Something like that, anyway.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Dan. I guess that makes it time for our second sponsor this evening. That's right, our friends at Ting. Ting.com, mobile. That makes sense. And let me just correct that. That's TechSNAP.ting.com. That lets them know that you appreciate them sponsoring the TechSNAP program here. What will you get if you go there? You'll find a smarter way to do mobile. The average Ting bill is just $23 per month per phone. I know, that sounds incredible, right? $23 a month. What do I get for that? Is that anything? That's like 10 messages? No. My friends, Ting operates on a different model. And they're not like these other big carriers. Sure, they may be a reseller of those carriers, but Ting wants to focus on you, the customer. That's why they have a killer dashboard. You don't need to spend time, especially like, hey, my cell phone's not working. How do I call my cell phone provider? You don't need to. Ting has an awesome app. It has an awesome dashboard. They really give you the tools to administer your own account and make it work really well. Plus, it's pay for what you use. Yeah, that's right. Pay for what you use. Your minutes, your messages, your megabytes. Go on over to their rates page. There you'll find this really fun website. It lets you just kind of click on some boxes, put together what it will be. Lines start at just $6 a month. Then you just pay for your minutes, messages, and megabytes. If you don't use some of those, you don't pay for them. If you don't use anything, it's just $6 a month. Yeah, maybe there's some like taxes and fees and stuff. Ting can't do anything about that. That's Uncle Sam's story. That's all right. Just ignore that part. $6 a month. If you go to techsnap.ting.com, you'll get to use our promo code, which is, you got it right there. It's techsnap.ting.com. That gets you a $25 credit. You can use that on your first month's bill. Or, hey, you can bring your own phone to Ting, but they also have an awesome shop. So go to their shop. You'll find lots of awesome phones. One of the great things about Ting is that they make it really easy to work with a ton of phones. So whether you need a CDMA phone, you need a GSM phone, you have one that does both, Ting works with all of those. SIM cards start at only like $9. You can buy the latest Apple iPhone 7. You watch the TechSNAP program, you hear Dan talking about the iPhone all the time. You're like, ooh, I'd like a secure phone. Boom, go to Ting, pick that up right now. They offer some financing, but it's not this kind of like crazy financing where you're like, does this like affect my premiums and I'm in some contract and if I try to leave it's like, no, none of that. There's no early termination fee. There's no contracts. There's no overage charges. There's no like, oh, well, you get like 3 gigs of tethering data, but if you use more, then you have to pay this extra fee. No, none of that. You just pay for what you use. The rates are very simple. That's why Ting is mobile. That makes sense. They just do things differently. They're not trying to, be the next media company that sells you your stuff. They're not trying to have their own app store or their own payment store built into your phone. They don't get in the way of your updates from from your firmware provider. None of it. They're just simple, pay for what you use mobile. This is exactly what we need. So go check out techsnap.ting.com. And that brings us to today's feedback segment, this section of the show where we hear from you, our wonderful audience. It usually makes us happy, maybe sometimes upset, and always curious to hear more. First up today, we've got a letter in from Boston. I hope I've pronounced that right. If not, hey, just give us more feedback correcting me. He's writing today about IPv6 only. Let's check this out. He writes, "Hi. Firstly, I would like to apologize for my English, which is my second language. I hope you will understand my meaning. Hey, so far so good, and no matter, we're happy to work through that. Thank you very much for writing to us. I would like to say that I've been watching TechSNAP for about 5 years now. Awesome. And I still love it. Dan, I really like your attitude against people who made a terrible mistake or that they've had a breach or something, that you feel sorry about this, that these people are in a bad situation. Admirably worthy characteristics of yours. I will also try to do this now as well. I think you have a good personality." Hey, I agree with that, Dan. So those are some nice compliments.
Thank you.
I have some networking questions. I really hope you can give me a solution. Well, we can do our best anyway. Recently, I discovered that my ISP, besides giving me a static IPv4 address, also provides me with a static IPv6 address. So my network is accessible through both IPv4 and IPv6. In IPv4 world, we got used to NAT. If you wanted a server in your network to be accessible from the internet, you had some solutions. Port forward, proxy, reverse proxy, VPN, ... I think in IPv6 world, it is a little bit different. A server in my network can be accessible from the internet directly by its IPv6 address. Am I correct? Here is my concern. How will I be able to access my IPv6 only server from another ISP? For instance, from my neighbor's house where their router supports only IPv6. Or perhaps if my mobile provider or my roaming mobile provider don't support IPv6. Will it help if I use IPv6 address to connect directly to my IPv6 only server from IPv4 only ISP? Or will DNS somehow help? I hope you still understand what I'm trying to ask. Do you have any real-life experiences like this? My second question, or should I say a deep dive request, talk about IPv6. I grew up in an IPv4 only world, and now everywhere I look, it's still IPv4. Although IPv6 is almost 20 years old, we still think and work in the IPv4 world. Can you please make a detailed comparison and, benefits, cost, etc. of 6 over 4? For instance, these comparisons, PV6 prefix delegation, NDP, subnetting, private internal network addresses, gateways, loopbacks, link local addresses, the list goes on. And then he provides us some more information here, like what his IP address range is, which has been redacted. Thank you, Dan. And then asks a question, does this mean that I've got in my network 4.7 times 10 to the 21 of IPv6 addresses? 4 sextillion? Thanks for the help and possible deep dive. Keep up on the great work. Boston. That's some awesome feedback. I mean, that's a lot to unpack there, so it might take us a second, but that's awesome. Thank you for providing us with the details. And I think that's a pretty good request. What do you think of it, Deep Dive to Beer?
Well, I went to see when I first used IPv6, and my first blog post on it seems to have been 2006, so that's about 11 years ago. And I've only used Hurricane Electric Tunnels. I've never had native IPv6. Now, one of the things he mentions is that in the IPv4 world, we get used to NAT. Well, it didn't always used to be that way because NAT came about because there weren't enough IPv4. It's IP4.
It's hard to keep it straight.
Yeah. IP4 addresses used to be plentiful, but when the internet was first created, they only had this many bits. And then the internet took off and that many bits wasn't enough. And that's how IPv6 came about. But at one time, you would be given, say, a /24 or a /16. And there are a lot of companies that still have huge swaths of /16 IP, publicly routable, that's the key, publicly routable IP addresses.
You still see a lot of universities that have those, those big grants or early corporations.
Yep. So when you have publicly routable IP addresses, you don't use NAT. You basically the data comes into the firewall, the packets come into the firewall, and they go straight off to that computer inside. There's no NAT involved. NAT came about mostly for places that couldn't get their own subnet. So basically, they were given us an IP address by their ISP, and then everything that happened inside there had to be NATed, and that's where NAT came about. So IPv6 isn't very different. There's no NAT needed. You just allow or block things on an IP by IP address basis. You'll probably be allowing certain IP addresses to come in and denying everything else. So to answer the question is, yes, a server in your network can be accessible from the internet directly to its IPv6. It can be. You can choose to block it, and I suggest you do unless you have a good reason to allow it, and then allow only the ports that are relevant for that host. So your next question is, will I be able to access my IPv6 only router from another ISP? Short answer, yes. If they have IPv6, you can get there. And you've allowed your IP traffic to flow through your firewall to that server. For instance, from your neighbor's house, where their server supports only IPv4, no, you can't get there from here. If you don't have IPv6 locally, you can't get to anything that's on IPv6. Sometimes people provide IPv4 addresses for their IPv6 services, but then they're handling that translation.
Right. You still need something that has an IPv4 address to do that translation.
Yeah. But you can't get there. The short answer is no. If you don't have IPv6 on your machine, you can't get to a machine that has IPv6. That's the simple answer. If your mobile provider doesn't support IPv6, no, you can't get there. Will it help if I use an IPv6 address? Yeah, you could, but if your current network that you're on doesn't support IPv6, you're not going to get to your IPv6 address. DNS will help, yes, but again, it won't help if IPv6 is not supported on the network that you're on. Now, I know that some people at home have gone entirely IPv6, and when they go out into the real world, and it's headed to a IP4 address, they have something called IPv6 to IP4 address translation. So that works as well. He has a /56. Did you see that? Do you know how much that is? Yes, I think his math is right. I did the math. Basically, he winds up with, let me see here. He gets an IPv4 /64 contains 18, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sets of 000s IPv4 addresses. And he has 256 of those.
Yes.
So he has more IPv6 addresses than he will ever need, even if he assigns one address per byte of RAM that he has in his computer.
I think that's great, though. Like, it's nice because the recommendations, I believe, like from RIPE, etc., you know, for like larger networks, it's a 48, and then, you know, like a 52 or 56, and then some people end up with a 64. I think that's unfortunate. Some ISPs do that, but and maybe for like just your average home person, that's not too bad. But especially with IPv6 recommending that, you know, you don't split subnets below /64, it's really nice to have those, you know, the 256 of those subnets if you wanted to be able to have, you know, those on different VLANs or other things at home. I'm
not sure what I have.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think right now I only have a 64. I might be able to change how I'm requesting that and get it increased. I'll have to look into that. I am definitely very interested in IPv6, and I would love to not have to fight with NAT so much. That would really be wonderful.
Who provides your NAT IPv6?
I use a local Seattle ISP called Cascade Link.
So you get it native?
Yes. Yeah. And it's Ethernet right to my apartment, which is nice. The switch is in my hallway. I walk by it every day.
I don't like you.
It's pretty nice.
I have I'm looking for Tunnel Broker.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Hurricane Electric is great to mention for this kind of thing.
That's who I'm using.
Didn't the other big one just close down? I thought I saw. What were they called?
Who is the other one?
Let's see here. 6XS. Here we go.
I don't know them.
So I think they were doing a similar thing where they were providing tunnels. Let's see here.
I'm just trying to get into my Hurricane Electric account. And where's my... Oh, there it is.
Oh, yeah, here we go. So they used to do the same kind of thing where they would provide a tunnel. Currently, 6XS is not accepting signups, nor tunnel or subnet requests. We're doing this action to ensure that instead of going the easy way of using our service, you should go call your ISP and get IPv6. This is in the hope that they finally realize that it was 2016 already, that IPv6 is 20 years old, as pointed out by our feedback person, and that they should really have deployed IPv6 already. Yeah, I mean, that's hard to argue with.
So I have a routed /64 and I have a routed /48. So it appears I have two /48s. I'm allowed to have 2 more, 3 more. I'm allowed to have 3 more tunnels, each with a /48, I'm guessing. I don't know. I haven't looked. But yeah, basically, if you can't get native IPv6, use Hurricane Electric and do it that way. So basically, my Freshport server has a /48, which is ridiculous.
That's awesome. I know I had a lot of fun last year. I was using LexD as a container thing, but I was paying for a hardware server, and I was setting it all up with this and trying to set it up as a big build host. And IPv6 just made it so simple. I could spin up a new container and DHCP, and then it would have a public IPv6 address. It was so simple. And unfortunately, there's lots of places, coffee shops, and my work at the time, and other places where it's just I couldn't. They only had IPv4, and it's this is making it so painful, and now I have to duplicate all this stuff and set up yeah, exactly.
This is your friend.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I really might have to look into that.
For those that don't know, we talked about this off air. This is a, what do you call it? An access point?
Yeah,
or
wireless hotspot. Some people
refer to it as MiFi or something, or Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi,
yeah.
Wireless access point, hotspot.
But yeah, this supports IPv6. I haven't verified that it works, but a friend of mine has one, a colleague, and he tells me that it does IPv6.
If anything, it seems like some of the mobile providers have been some of the first. I mean, they're also doing carrier grade NAT and stuff, but I think because of that, they've been some of the first to jump on the IPv6 bandwagon, which is nice.
Yep. So yeah, there's your feedback. Hopefully it works. I wish I had native IPv6. Thanks, Verizon Fios. When are you coming to the ball game?
Yeah.
And thank you very much, Hurricane Electric, for allowing me to have to use your IPv6 networks.
And if anyone else, exactly. If anyone else wants to talk about IPv6 or wants to see us maybe do a deep dive on it in the future, please write in and let us know. That'll be very helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, on to our second feedback item today, and that's from our friend in the IRC room, Mr. Architect. He was writing about ZOL and other Linux file systems. Howdy guys, great show again as usual. Just thought I'd follow up on the feedback another listener submitted regarding rough edges with ZFS on Linux. He's referring to the feedback segment on episode 318. As I've had some trouble with it myself. I'd like to think that I'm pretty well versed with maintaining Linux systems that I've run Gentoo as my daily driver for the better part of 2 years, even running it as my workstation at work. After switching to using ZOL as my root file system, I began running into issues that I'd not run into before, like my system failing to get past to the bootloader, and running into things like grub2 actually carrying what my root file system is and what file system it is. Seriously, my bootloader needs to know that crap now? That's kind of the whole point of your initramfs. And then running into trouble where grub2 didn't want to boot any multi-pool drives. Oh, that sounds annoying. And verifying that the SPL and kernel versions are compatible. Yeah, that's a thing. As well as making sure that my libc's pthreads was compatible to actually import the zpool. Just so many points where things go wrong after the install, assuming you manage to get a distro that even allows you to install the SPL and ZFS in the live environment. For instance, Void's kernel version was too new at the time to work with the SPL. As a side note, XFS has ruined some games for me on Steam for some reason, and had a tendency to break beyond repair after the first boot. No idea why, so that really wasn't great for general use. After all that hassle, and seeing how fantastic ZFS was, I really couldn't go back to ext3/4, ButterFS, XFS, MurderFS, Riser4, or JFS, no matter how great the hardware support was. So now I'm a mostly happy user with TrueOS, Dragonfly, FreeBSD, HardenBSD, OpenIndiana, and Plan 9, depending on how much free time I have and which bit of hardware I'm trying to use at the moment. I just can't leave these wonderful native file systems, ZFS, Hammer, and the potential for Hammer 2. I'll switch back to Linux when at least one of them is ported over. Seriously, at this point, we should just port Hammer instead of wasting more time with ButterFS, or at least pitch in to get Hammer 2 running sooner. I'm sure these issues aren't really all that relevant when you're in the enterprise and you don't use a recent kernel, since there's next to no risk of the SPL breaking compatibility, but it does make it significantly more difficult for the power users of us out there who want to have a great file system for their devices that serve multiple roles, and the often cited developers who would certainly get pissed if their file system breaks before being able to sync all their source code back to the repo, or even worse, if the repo's file system trashes their code. Just one thing that really seems to need some love if Linux is going to continue this meteoric rise in adoption and general use. Though I won't complain if it means more work on BSD and Illumos. But yeah, just thought I'd share some of my file system woes since I've had it come up in the last show. And additionally, Wes, hey, that's me. Great talk with Chris about the state of Linux file systems at Linux Fest Northwest, though I disagree with the general consensus that ext4/XFS is good enough, because unless they start covering ground fairly quickly, they're not going to be good enough for all that long. Well, thank you, Architect. I know we certainly appreciate you hanging out here live so often, being a part of the JB network. And also, thank you for your feedback here. I'll just start with that last bit. Thank you. Linux Fest Northwest was a lot of fun. And I think you're right about that. It's like, the spirit of my comment there was really, I think exactly what you're saying. They're maybe good enough now. It works fine for, I'm installing Linux on my laptop and I don't, I have backups and other things. But I think you are right that Linux needs to be working on those things to maintain maintain competitiveness and to be planning for the future. I can't comment too much on, a lot of the individual file system woes. It's really too bad. In my experience, XFS has been pretty rock solid. We use it a lot of work and some other large deployments I've seen. It's obviously no ZFS in terms of checksumming, snapshots, all of those other features. So I'm not quite sure what you ran into, but it'd be very interesting to hear more about that and, see some sort of systemic surveys, studies on this kind of data. I would also be interested, I think it would be great to see more cross-file system development or sharing between things like, can I even mount like FreeBSD's UFS on my Linux systems? I'm not sure. I've never tried. But it seems like, especially since we're all working with these open source file systems, it'd be a lot better to see. ZFS is really the best for it right now if you want to run, have a decent file system on more than one operating system. What are your thoughts, Dan?
I didn't know he was going to slam so hard. I read the first bit about zvol and said, "Oh, I don't know about this," and so I gave it to you. And I didn't know that he started then talking about these other operating systems. I thought it was just a question about zvol and stuff. Sorry. I have heard stories of people just taking their ZFS system and moving it from one operating system to another. And because the versions of the OS that they're using could read that particular version of ZFS, you can't get ahead of the game. Right. It is backwards compatible. So if you're backwards compatible with whatever you're using, you should be fine. And I have known people to do that. I'm not sure if Hammer is helpful here for you or not. I don't know enough about it, and I don't know if you'll be able to port it over to Linux at all. But yeah, I agree. ZFS seems to be the best thing to be using at the moment. It's way ahead of all the other file systems that he's talking about. It's definitely more stable. It may not be as stable under Linux yet as it is under some of the other operating systems it's been on, but that's only a matter of time. How old is ZFS? Is it 10 years old or
something
or
like on the
years?
order of 10, right?
Yeah, it's
like 2004. Let's see.
It is sufficiently stable on FreeBSD that a lot of big shops are using it for very important stuff.
Okay, looks like it was introduced
35 terabytes back there.
Yes,
sorry?
Right. Introduced November 2005 with Open Solaris.
Okay, so 12 years ago. It came out with Open Solaris 12 years ago. You got to be careful with new file systems.
Right.
What did Apple do? Apple came out with APFS. Is that what they're calling? So they put it on all their iPhones. They put it on all their cord out. They put it on all their iPhones first before they start coming out on OS X, because they can. They have a huge installation base here and come up with any fixes and stuff in a rather controlled environment, rather than deploying it into the wild with users like you and me. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I do feel some of his pain. I've not run into all of those problems with CFS on Linux, but I've certainly heard stories like this that people have, and you can't really get away from. It's not upstream in the kernel. You have to build modules for it. You can run into compatibility issues. There's a lot of, installers, bootloaders, other things in the Linux ecosystem are only now kind of catching up with a lot of that configuration and having, I think just the latest grub release finally added some more, LZ4 and stuff, like, various stuff that really makes it a little bit more feature compatible with some of the native ZFS systems. And I think he really hit it on the head when he talks about, if you want to have, you're a power user, you want to have all this like on your laptop, you want to have snapshots and other things in ZFS. It works a lot better, right? If you can just have, a stable kernel server in the corner where you do all your file system work, or you have a FreeBSD or a FreeNAS or whatever, like then you kind of don't have to worry about those things. But it is a lot harder when you're like, well, I update my kernel every day and I'm trying to have to recompile all this stuff. So that is a little bit disappointing. And I am like the Hammer file system is technically very interesting. There's a lot of work going on, and I really would be disappointed if Linux didn't kind of have that. I am interested in like Bcachefs and other things going on. I think it's important for the Linux community to keep up. And hopefully he's right. Like, if you, especially maybe now as we get to a future where Linux, FreeBSD can run Linux, Windows run Linux, like there's lots of stuff happening with Linux, Docker containers, other things. Maybe we can get to a future where you have a better chance of using some of these very interesting other operating systems, FreeBSD, Illumos, and then running, your Linux application on top if you can't get it native to the operating system you want to run. I'm not sure, but I think it's definitely worthy of, people putting time and energy in and seeing what we can advance.
It's been a long day. That was not directed at you.
Yes.
I've been up since 5 a.m. my time.
File systems are very interesting.
Just after 9 p.m. Yes, they are.
Exactly.
Yes, they are.
So thank you, Architect. That's an awesome bit of feedback. I hope we've answered everything. It was a long letter, so I'm sure I've missed something. You'll just have to write back in. And if other people have advice, opinions, horror stories, great stories, go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact. There you can find a form that will let us know all of your opinions. And with that, I think it's time for our final sponsor today, which we're talking about storage. So who else could it be but our friends at IX Systems? Go on over to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. There, you will find the definitive guide for buying hardware for open source software. They've been doing this a long time. They really are experts in the field of storage, big data, reliable hardware appliances, and, building servers that work right the first time. They will build you a custom server with incredible Intel processors. They've got talented sales engineers standing by, ready to talk to you, ready to learn about what your workflow is, what your workload is, how many IOPS you need, how many drives you need, what your storage requirements, what are your growth requirements, right? So they've seen big installations, little installations. They've seen all the different types of problems that can have. So they can, start asking you questions that you weren't going to think about till 6 months down the road. Maybe you're moving from the cloud to your own data center. IX Systems will be a great partner for something like that. Maybe you just need, a second NAS to be another backup for your home life or your small business or your office, or you're finally fed up with those big blue box vendors that have terrible support and make you wait on hold, and you really just want, a personal touch. You understand that your workload's important, your business is important, your clients are important, and they have expectations of you. IX Systems understands that and wants to be your partner. Go check out some of the people that they work with. People like Adobe, VMware, Noah, Sega, Symantec, GM, Splunk, Tumblr, Hitachi, LinkedIn. Like, they work with big people doing big data, who have real data centers, who have petabytes of storage. So maybe you just need a FreeNAS. Go on over, check out the FreeNAS Mini. It's adorable. It's powerful. It's got a ton of storage. It's super easy. If you have a problem with it, IX Systems has great support. Maybe you just need, you want a new server. You want to make sure it has IPMI. You want to make sure it has SAS expander. You want to make sure that you get the right kind of drive that have the longevity, that have been burned in, tested, white glove service. You want to make sure that it's got the OS you want with the file system you want, pre-configured, ready to go. They'll ship it to you, goes right, gets plugged right in, put in the rack, turned on, and, it can join your cluster right there. You don't get that kind of service very many places, and that's what makes IX Systems different. You can tell that they get it, right? They get it. They get open source. They get servers. They get backend. They get front end. They get the whole game, right? They're involved with projects like OpenZFS. They're involved with projects like TrueOS, FreeNAS. And they're involved with the community, like going over to their blog page. I was just at Linux Fest Northwest, which was a ton of fun. Guess what? IX Systems was there too. You can see some awesome pictures there. It was a combination FreeBSD, FreeNAS, TrueOS, Lumina booth, which is awesome. And, they're there. They want to hang out. They want to talk with people in the community. They have a ton of great swag. They have those BSD horns that everyone loves. More than that, if you just peruse their blog, you'll see a lot of what makes IX Systems different. They're not yes, they're a business, they're a successful business, they've been here a long time, they know what they're doing, but more than that, they're a part of the community and they're ready to be a partner with you. So don't waste any more time, don't waste any more money. Go over to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. And that brings us to the last segment of today's show. That's right, it's time for everyone's favorite, the Roundup. Dan and I have worked hard finding various links from around the world. They didn't make the cut for the top of the show, but these are still worth checking out. So let's fly through them right now. What's first up, Mr. Dan?
Well, this first one is rather tongue-in-cheek, but kind of prophetic.
Prophetic. Something like that, anyway.
In that ways in which the WannaCry ransomware could have been much worse.
Right. So this is something we talked about. Huge story. I'm sure you've all heard about a lot about it. It was on last episode.
It was. So how about time-based encryption? How could you make it worse? Time-based encryption. So basically at the moment, when the ransomware infects your machine and installs a Krypter locker and immediately starts encrypting your file. But imagine if it did this. It goes around and infects everything, installs backdoor and keeps quiet. It infects other machines. Everything gets infected. And then on day 14, it activates itself and starts encrypting files. So basically, the old version, the version that got out there, sort of started taking over machines and spreading and encrypting as it went. So once the first message came up, people started acting on it. But this way, you've got 14 days to spread before you do anything. That would be worse. But wait, there's more. What if it waited 30 days before it lets you know that it's encrypted the files?
Oh.
So what it does is it infects everything, but it still allows files to be read and written. So what it does is install something
like a fuse style, interface. Interesting.
And encrypts. And then 30 days later, it removes the decryption key so that you can't get anything read.
Wow.
So how are your backup points after 30 days?
Oh, that's evil. And I'm sure this would make it a lot harder to try to trace the spread of this thing and understand when it actually started. Wow.
I doubt that a lot of people would have 30-day snapshots, but even if you did have 30-day snapshots, you're losing anything created recently.
Yeah, totally.
And you would have backed up stuff. Anything created in the last 30 days is backed up and encrypted.
Doubly encrypted.
Would it be?
Well, I mean, I guess if you read it, no, yeah, it wouldn't be.
No. The backups would not be encrypted because you're not doing a device-based backup. You're opening the file and reading it, so you'd be reading the decrypted version. So maybe he's missing that point there.
Interesting. Either way, oh man, that would be... this is evil.
Yep. Now, what about extortion with your friends? So basically, your files get encrypted. You can pay to get your files back. But what if it's not your files you're responsible for? What if their files are your friends or colleagues? What if they told you who you get the virus from?
Oh.
So that you got infected because it came from there. You gave me this. You fixed this.
Yeah, you're liable now.
Which is kind of silly because you've got to, if you patched your stuff, this wouldn't be a problem. So don't blame someone else. So now, one other thing they said, what if it was CryptoLocker with a Windows Update DDoS? So you've got 200,000 machines out there, they're all infected, and they're all launching a DDoS against the Windows Update server, and no one gets the patches.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't patch because you can't get to the Windows Update server.
Oh, boy.
So what do they suggest to stay safe? Enable auto updates and have frequent backups and store them long enough. Store them for a long time.
Yeah, right. Long enough that it would be inconvenient or unlikely that someone would, do something like this in a long enough time frame that would invalidate all of your backups. Boy,
Yes.
that's hard. It really makes you think about how secure your things are, how good your backups are, and what's running on your system. Yikes. Ugh. Okay, so moving on to perhaps happier, not really, I don't know. Moving on to the next feedback, or roundup item anyway. We've got an article over here from the Joyent team about a postmortem for an outage in US East 1. What's this about?
I think this is the Brian. No.
That would make sense. Yeah. Is this the follow-up to...
I think it is, because just by reading this, what are the... Well, when I started reading this, I started thinking about the Brian Cantrell video, and it'll become clear why. So, due to an operator error, all US East 1 API systems and customer instances are simultaneously rebooted at such and such a time. Root cause of this was the result of an operator performing updates of some new capacity in our fleet, and they were using the tooling that allows for remote updates of software. So, like Ansible or CF Engine or something, but I'm sure it wasn't one of them. The command to reboot the select set of new servers that needed to be updated was mistyped and instead specified all servers in the data center. Unfortunately, the tool in question does not have enough input validation to prevent this from happening without extra steps or confirmation, and went ahead and issued a reboot command to every server in US East 1 without delay. Boom, reboot.
So the tool they may have works very well. They should be proud.
It does. So this was compounded, reboot, you come back, that should be fine. But the systems by design looked for a boot server to respond to Pixie boot requests. But because they were all rebooting at the same time, there was extremely high contention for the TFTP boot infrastructure. And all of their infrastructure has throttles in place to ensure that it cannot run away with a machine. So they realized, oh my God, it's being throttled. So they removed the throttles, and this enabled most customer instances to come online over the following 20 to 30 minutes. So there were a small number of machines that have a known transient bug in a network driver on legacy hardware.
Oh no.
Getting a DHCP lease upon boot occasionally fails. So in the past, the network device encounters this boot time issue about 10% of the time. So the solution there is just to reboot it again.
Yikes.
So what are we going to do? We're going to improve the tooling and make sure that they validate the input, and it will not allow for all servers and control plane servers to be rebooted simultaneously. So, in closing, we're sorry for the magnitude of this issue and how it affected our customers. Sorry. We hope it won't happen again.
Yikes. This really reminds me of that recent AWS outage where it was also ended up root cause was a fat fingering, which,
yes,
boy, that's rough. Well, and I think we've all been there, we're like, maybe you didn't even do it, but you were like, ooh, I better not hit enter on that command line.
Nobody at my work has ever heard of me rebooting a server by accident, I'm sure.
No, never. Dan, you wouldn't. You're the admin.
Oh, I did. I hadn't been there long either.
It's like a rite of passage, right? Whoops.
A couple of months, maybe. 6 months. I'm not sure.
I mean, it's always that battle, right? Of like, you want conciseness and expressivity and power and control. And when you don't want to have to jump through hoops to do things.
In my case, I was just in the wrong terminal session, did not look before I said, okay, I checked that. Yeah, that's right. Back to the terminal session. Okay, shut down, reboot. Oh.
That's rough. Boy.
Oh. Everyone just disappeared off IRC. Oh.
Oh, no. That's terrible news.
Yes.
Well, I'm sure you learned from that.
I did.
Just like Joyent has learned from this. I'm sure they'll have some more interesting stuff. They have some interesting architecture there. They're running quite the shop. So I'll be curious to see more from them.
Me too.
Okay, up next, 1.9 million Bell customer email addresses stolen by an anonymous hacker. 1,700 names and phone numbers also stolen in a data breach. Uh-oh.
Yep.
That does not sound good.
So Bell is apologizing after 1.9 email addresses were stolen. Nobody's quite sure who did it, and there's no indication that any financial, password, or other sensitive information was accessed. Bell was confident that the incident was unrelated to a massive spike in ransomware infections. So basically, this has nothing to do with
WannaCry.
WannaCry. But there's a little bit more information in here, but basically I wanted to cover this because, unsurprisingly, it was not a U.S. company. It was a Canadian company.
Whoa, interesting.
Yeah, Bell covers a whole lot of stuff. It covers satellite TV. It covers cable TV. No, I don't think they have cable TV. It's only satellite TV. And, of course, telephones. But, yeah, they're a big company. Huge. Yeah. They do lots of things.
Big media ISP conglomerate thing.
Yes.
Someone that shows up... similar people show up on this program all the time, turns out.
Yes.
Sounds like we could expect maybe some more things here, like the attacker or the possible attacker warns more will leak. This shows how Bell doesn't care for its customer safety, and they could have avoided this public announcement. Bell, if you don't cooperate, more will leak. And then a smiley face. Oh, boy.
Interestingly enough, I knew the guy that used to answer the email address abuse@bell.ca.
Oh, nice.
And he is now with another much more interesting enterprise.
Yeah, I hope so. Not a great time to be involved with the Bell IT organization.
No, that's not what I meant. I meant where he is now is a very interesting place to work, but I can't tell you where that is.
Secret.
It is very secret.
Okay, well, that's a perfect segue to our next roundup item. This is a blog post over at appcanary.com. Everything you need to know about HTTP security headers.
This was interesting because it's only modifying your HTTP headers, and it gives you quite a bit of protection, like against cross-site scripting and against sort of man-in-the-middle attacks where you only provide HTTPS and someone tries to redirect browser data to an HTTP connection and then they do HTTPS the rest of the way. And, excuse me, just little things that you can do as a website provider to make it better for the users that are using your website.
Yeah, I like that this was like, it looked like it was, it's modern, it's up to date, it's well curated, so it can make it a really good place. And they have they talk a lot about here, like how to do it, whether you're using Nginx or Rails or Django or Express.js or Varnet. So they really have a lot of stuff here for, regardless of what you're doing. You don't have to be a security expert. You don't have to know a lot about this, but you can pretty quickly, easily learn how to take your application security up just a little bit, which is awesome.
Yeah, and they have a sign-up thing on the front page. Have you ever used them?
I have not, no.
Well, what happens if I type my name and address in here? What's the worst that could happen? Sign up for a 14-day trial. Well, no. They want a little bit more information. 14-day trial. Well, with our tiny open source agent, no. I'll have a look later.
Yeah. So it's just kind of an interesting. So even if you don't want to use their services, it's not the right value proposition for you. This is a good review of the various types of security you should be aware about if you're building a web stack application or even just consuming those, which, hey, we all do these days.
They don't support my platforms anyway.
That's too bad.
Ruby and PHP, but that's it. And it's $30 a month.
Okay. So maybe reasonable, maybe not. Depends on what you're doing, what your needs are, and your security expertise. But it's nice to see, even if you can't afford to hire a permanent security developer for your team or whatever, maybe this is a good option.
And at least this one blog post about the headers is interesting reading, and people should consider this.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I guess that brings us to the final roundup item this week. This is an interesting project over at GitHub. How many people are around? Count the number of people around you by monitoring Wi-Fi signals. Interesting.
Now, someone points out right off the bat, it may be illegal to monitor networks for MAC addresses, especially on networks that you do not own. And then there's a link to a discussion page. And in the discussion page, it mentions this interesting point. I am not a lawyer, but if you walk down the street with your smartphone in your pocket with Wi-Fi turned on, you will be, quote, intercepting thousands of packets from networks you have no right to connect to. Because that's how Wi-Fi works.
Yeah, it is. Totally. Which is very true.
If all you're doing is monitoring data that's flowing by your service.
Right. It seems like it should fall maybe into the same vein as, like photography in public spaces or, other things like that where you don't have reasonable
Yep. I mean, you're sitting there in Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
And basically it's just networks that are flying all around you. If you don't want people to listen, encrypt them.
Yep. I think this is interesting in particular because I've seen some, I know there's a couple new products that have been launched where you're trying to do home security based on Wi-Fi sensing and other things, and some research from MIT and others that are exploring this space as well. But this is awesome because they've got hacker-worthy instructions for how to get some cheap antennas or other things, put it together, start playing with it, and it's right on GitHub, so you can just clone it down and start playing with it.
Yep. And the guy says, what would you use this for? And he uses it just to see if who's around the house. Is my roommate home, for example?
Mm-hmm. Or maybe, you could have simpler thing, where it triggers based on actions, or, hey, you put something on your dog and your dog comes into the house and it triggers a food bowl, or who knows?
Yep. You can do a whole lot of stuff with us.
Awesome. Well, I might have to give this a try later. I think I have at least a couple things that can do monitor mode in my various peripherals, so it seems worth a shot.
Yep, I agree.
Although I'm sure it'll be hard because I live in an apartment building, so I don't know how to validate it because there's a ton of people around already.
Well, you can tell how many people are around.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I should roughly estimate.
I bet if you plotted a graph, it would be...
Oh, yeah. Oh, now I have TechSNAP homework. I like that. Awesome. Okay, well, I guess that wraps up today's roundup. Anything you'd like to add before we get out of here, Dan?
No. Just make sure you patch your shit. You're going to be in trouble if you don't.
Exactly. You don't want to be on Dan's patch list. Let me just tell you that. So go on over to jupiterbroadcasting.com. There you can bone up on our past episodes, the previous incarnation of this show, the new shows on the network. Yeah, that's right. Ask Noah, the Linux Action News, and all the other fine shows that are already on the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. You can go to the contact page there. We've also got a calendar, the live page. Let's see, so much more, really. It's a great website, so go there. If you want to have more feedback options, you can go to techsnap.reddit.com, or you can find us both on Twitter. I'm at Wes Payne, and he is at techsnap_Dan. With that, that's been episode 320 of the TechSNAP program. Be here next week. We'll meet you here.